Hello, welcome everyone. I will project. Hi everyone. My name is Lauren Simpson and I am the President of Women in Film and Television in Victoria. Thank you so much for coming. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we are meeting today, the Dja Dja Wurrung and Tong peoples, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to First Nations people with us today. Welcome to Playback. This is the first year we're running this initiative and we're thrilled to have all of you here online and in person. Playback is bringing together inspiring regional and metro practitioners to helps if I can speak and breathe. I'm getting too excited. We're here to share stories, spark conversation, and build meaningful creative connections. We've chosen the focus of trans and gender diverse takes on identity and industry because our screen and media sectors are rich with trans and gender diverse talent and trailblazers. We never need a reason to celebrate TGD excellence, but we're delighted to be doing so during Trans Awareness Week. We are so proud. Oh, you can hear me. Oh, no one needs me twice. Thank God it's an intimate gathering of people. We're super proud to be presenting this event in partnership with Trans and Gender Diverse Bendigo and beyond. And we're so excited to be working with such a vibrant community organisation that is dedicated to supporting and advocating for trans and gender diverse people across regional Victoria. And all donations raised today will go towards them and our work. So hooray, go team. For those who don't know us, Women in Film and Television Victoria, we exist to support, connect women and gender diverse practitioners across the screen industries across all of Victoria. We're a membership-based organisation run entirely by a board of volunteers who love what we do and love our industry. It's really important that we're bringing events like this to regional places. We don't have a lot of these opportunities, so it's a big thank you to Yvette and Midsummer and the team for bringing this to us because we get to do it with a little bit of money for once, which is delightful. So thanks to everyone. I'd also love to take a moment to shout out to our exceptional membership coordinator and board member, Alex Richards. Alex has tirelessly put this entire event together themselves. We're really super proud and thank you so much for everything you've been doing. Before I introduce all of our incredible panelists, just a quick bit of housekeeping. Toilets, if anyone needs them, is just outside the door here. Please, phones on silent, Alex. For everyone, you've got a little piece of paper and online, please feel free to ask questions throughout the day. It is an open, but it is also a safe space. So with that in mind, it is safe both emotionally, mentally, physically. If you feel like you need to get up and fidget and move around, please feel free to do so. So please bear with me as I read this last little bit because it's important that I get these words correct because we have 4 incredible speakers with us today. So first up, we have Julie Peters. Yeah. Julie is a pioneering advocate, talented performer and media veteran and wonderful WIFIC member. With over 50 years at the ABC, Julie is one of the first openly transgender women to stand for political office in Australia and has spent decades advancing trans visibility, inclusion and representation across media and politics. Bayley Turner is an accomplished intimacy coordinator and actor whose work centres on creating safer, more inclusive sets and ensuring authentic, respectful storytelling. Tong is a bold and inclusive writer and director whose theatre and screen work explores power, culture and identity with wit, nuance and a fearless creative voice. And second page, apologies, Mitch Nivalis. A Bendigo-based filmmaker, photographer and community advocate, bringing a vital regional perspective through work that celebrates queer joy, connection and resilience. For those joining us in Bendigo, after the panel, we're going to break into small groups where each panelist will host an intimate conversation and then we'll have afternoon tea and you're invited to stay for a little bit of networking and chit-chats. So it is now my absolute pleasure to be introducing our host for our inaugural playback, Benjamin MacEllen. Yes. And as he looks up, playwright, author, performer, public speaker whose work is amplifying trans and queer voices, particularly in regional communities. His memoir, A Cut Closer to Whole, and his solo show, Trans Mansplaining, has sparked important conversations about gender diversity. And you're amazing. So please welcome Ben.
You can tell I've been a Toastmaster because you shake hands with every person that you come across. Yes. It's wonderful to be part of this event today. Just absolutely amazing. And the panelists, I'm just so excited to hear everything you have to say. So put your listening ears on and start thinking of some questions if you have for them. But I'd like to invite all of the panelists to come up and take a seat, and we'll get straight into it. Thanks so much to Lauren for that wonderful introduction and to giving an introduction to all of our panelists, and yeah, just kicking us off. I would have loved to have seen Zara from Bendigo Trans and Gender Diverse and Beyond. She's an amazing advocate and trans woman who has really changed the face of trans advocacy here in Bendigo and beyond. And she is moving on, but I did want to just shout out to her and just say I met her about 6 or 7 years in this very room, and the things that she's done for Bendigo and beyond for trans and gender diverse people has been absolutely amazing. So just a shout out to Zara Jones for all the work she's done. Now I'm going to start with you, Mitch, because I've just watched Mitch's amazing documentary. So my question is, your film Equal the Contest, which I've just watched, has had a significant impact on gender equality and LGBTIQA+ inclusion in sport. What inspired you to tell this story, and how did you approach the filmmaking process?
Inspiration-wise was I didn't set out to make a film. I joined a footy club, and the experience that I had in joining changed my life. So really, I'd signed up to do a master's during COVID for some stability because I lost all my work as a photographer and filmmaker. And so I was looking for a project, but at the same time, I joined this club, and as soon as I joined, everything that I felt in terms of belonging, I'd never felt in my life. I was 42. And so I was quickly thinking, well, I want to document this because I want everyone to understand what I was feeling and what I was going through. I wanted to be able to share with people what it was like to belong when you've never belonged or you've never felt like you belonged in your life. And so originally I just thought maybe I'll photograph some of the players and share some of their stories, because all the players that I was talking to were really interesting and had their own backstories. And then I thought, no, this is bigger than that. And our club got rejected from the league. And so then I thought, okay, I do need to document this. And the more I documented, the more I had this push-pull thing where I was like, well, I want to document this, but I also want to be in it. Like, I didn't want to be the usual documentary person that is sitting outside of a project looking into it. Because of how I was feeling belonging, the thought of sitting to the sidelines just wasn't an option. So then I thought, well, how can I do both? And so that's when I stuck cameras on my body, so that I could actually document and play at the same time.
Which is surprising to watch, because I have trouble with first person like games that I get motion sickness, but I didn't with that. It was really interesting. So yeah,
right. Yeah, so
Mitch had on their chest the camera.
Yeah, I had a camera on my chest and a camera on my head, and so I kind of then thought of myself as a moving tripod in a way, where if this camera was going to be photographing what was right in front of me, and then my head had to then capture if the ball wasn't right in front of me. So I was constantly it was a weird thing to document. But in doing that, then people just started saying, well, who's the body? Because I still wasn't thinking of myself being in the film. And alongside, I was recording some video diaries because I'm a terrible note taker, and I thought I need to remember what I'm feeling in order to write my thesis. So I just started doing video diaries, which were quite emotional because I thought no one was ever going to see them. And then when people started saying, who is the body in this footage? And I was like, it doesn't matter who the body is, you're just seeing. And people were like, no, you have to know who the body is. So then I was like, oh, okay, well, if I'm in it, if I'm going to be a storyline in this, why would anyone care about my story? And then when I started to think about my history in sport and belonging, I've had so many conversations with women and gender diverse people and even men about sport and what it is to fit in that space. I knew that my story was actually universal for people. So even if you're not gender diverse, even if you're not a woman, you would understand what it feels like to be in hyper-masculine environments where you feel like you don't belong.
Yeah.
And so that's how it all.
I will ask a follow-on question. When you went round with the screening of the film, what surprised you, if anything? What made you feel good about the film, or what surprised you about how audiences responded?
The biggest surprise for me was older white men's response. So a lot of the screenings that we did so far we've done over 65 screenings across Australia. A lot of them have been in regional towns, and the biggest surprise to me quite quickly was the way it was changing the way older white men thought about sport, and the realization that they actually had never thought outside their own perspectives before. And what came with that is shock and sadness and a desperate need to do better. And so the amount of conversations I've ended up having with older men after the screenings where they've come up to me and said, I didn't realize, I've never thought about this stuff before. How do I do better? What do I need to know? And I've become good friends actually with a footy coach in Melbourne who teaches or coaches a women's team. And he was kind of like, I hadn't even thought about this with my own players before. So we have had lots and lots of phone calls to unpack things. And yeah, that's been really beautiful actually. And I think it's particularly, there's a scene with Sam, who's one of the only male in our executive committee. And he talks about realizing that all he ever did was take from the game, and this realization that what he could do now is to give back, because mostly women and gender diverse people don't have people showing up for them. So that moment I think really resonates for men a lot.
It's a brilliant documentary, and if you haven't already seen it, certainly on SBS on demand. So it's a really amazing piece and surprising, and even if you're not into sport, it's a really incredible documentary.
Yeah, I always say it's not a sports doco, because people think that they have to be in, and it's not a football doco.
No.
Yeah, it's a doco about belonging. Yeah.
What's the title again?
Equal contest.
Yeah. Thank you. Awesome. I'll move on to Julie. Being trans in a male-dominated and often conservative workplace must have been challenging. I know you've spoken at length over many years about this, but tell us a little bit about how you navigated your identity in such an environment before you transitioned and then once you transitioned. Now that's a big question.
Yeah. First thing that comes to mind is that not long after I started the ABC, I was given the nickname Ghost. And in retrospect, that was because I think people found me very, very hard to read. And that was because I was feeling very, very unsafe and didn't really give out much about myself. I could walk into a room unnoticed, and people, I walk into a room and stand with a group, and then people say, "Fuck, how'd you get there?" And so then one person said, "Well, you must be a ghost. You can disappear and disappear." And it became, after a few years, most people didn't know my actual name. They only knew my nickname.
Oh, one of the ghosts.
Yeah. Well, I've got a few versions. People want to personalise it. I've got Ghost, El Ghosto Casper, El Ghosto and the Castanets. And the ghostess with the mostest.
It's amazing. Just on that, so after you transitioned, how did that all change?
Sorry, I don't probably answer that question. I'm one of nine kids. That's me, Joseph, Michael, Patrick, Christopher, Jared, David, Mary, and Monica. As you can see, I've got 7 brothers, and I was sent to boys' schools in high school. And so I already had strategies for being in an all-male environment, so I used those, and I would still claim I could speak male as a second language.
Okay, Jean, you've written for a wide range of series from Heartbreak High, 100% Wolf to erotic stories. What gets you excited about each project?
I think the opportunity to write very specific experiences and queer characters in queer situations that have that universal heartbeat, because I think like they're specific contexts and specific situations, but they're about romance or love or connection or pain and heartbreak, and those are all things that everyone shares. And I think it's always interesting to kind of see how far I can kind of like stretch that experience so people can resonate and understand that things are specific, but also not actually that. Like we're all special, but we're not. And I do think that's important to kind of keep pushing. And I also just, am I allowed to swear? I just like writing fucked up little gay people.
Yes.
I think it's important to not have like good and perfect characters. I think we're at a stage where we're allowed to be messy, and it's important to keep expanding on the complexity of how we're able to be seen on stage, on screen, whatever it is. Because I think having to, like, I think at the more queer culture is mainstreamed, the more it adopts, you know, like sort of the safe boxes. And I think for me, I think it's important to keep pushing what the underlying kind of ideals around freedom and the unpacking of like a heteropatriarchal, et cetera, all that. So I think just, yeah, getting to write weird little characters who aren't trying to fit those molds is exciting and probably the best bit of my job. But it is also tricky because, for example, the erotic stories episode I wrote called Mask Up, one of the, I think there was a review where this person was like, I don't think people talk like that. And I'm like, that's hilarious because every single person I know in my friend group talks like that. And so you don't know anyone who talks like that, but I know literally, I don't know any, I only know people who talk like that. And I think that kind of criticism or that kind of approach from when you take something that is not mainstream and you take it into a big platform like SBS, those are the limits that you can kind of start to hit. Is just people going, this isn't how characters are supposed to speak. It's like, no, this isn't how the people in your life, that's not how they behave, but that's because you have like 5 friends.
They all look exactly
They all
like
look exactly the same, and I've forgotten all their names already. I'm so sorry.
What was it? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John?
That's how I feel when straight people introduce themselves to me. Just like, Scott, it's weird.
How do you approach, in terms of writing a play or a screenplay, thinking about queer and trans characters, about whether their queerness and their trans is the story, or they just happen to be queer and transgender or gender diverse and a part of a completely different story? How much of that?
I think it's always a bit of both. Like there's not, they don't exist in isolation. I'm not writing like straight stories with queer overtones. I'm writing a story, and I think because I am queer and the way that I see the world is in a particular way, it's always going to be reflected in the characters, whether they're straight characters or not, in the story that I'm writing. I think, for example, I think like even when I was writing for season 2 of Heartbreak High, even the like straight characters in the show, when I'm writing that dialogue, it's still like a little camp. Like I can't like extract, like I can match it to the existing character and do that, but I think everyone is inevitably bringing their own version of the world that they're living, and that's going to be how the characters come out, and that's going to be the view that's there. And so I guess it's, I'm not thinking about the story in isolation from queerness, because the queerness is part of the story, and they're always kind of working together, and whatever that character is doing is is driven by lots of things, including their queerness, their gender, their life experience, what they're trying to get, and
You would be in writers' rooms for something like Heartbreak High. What has it been like as a queer writer in a group of people who may be cishet?
Sorry, can you ask that last bit again?
Oh, what's it like? Like, how do you find being in a writer's room? What's the balance of queer writers to, cishet writers, white men?
I would say there is still quite kind of automatic. I think the big broadcasters and streamers still sort of have this underlying assumption that for a room to be successful, there has to be some old white man who's heading the project at some level. There's a real habit to kind of partner emerging creatives or people who haven't had the opportunity to lead shows with white men who have, and assume that that's how a project's going to succeed. It's because you've got this person who's done 20 years of the same boring show and therefore you know how to make your show more standard. I think, for example, something like Heartbreak High, there was a very deliberate choice to avoid that, and so the room was a really big mix of people from different levels of writing experience, but also different, like they were queer and not queer people, but there were no old white men, and I think you can see that reflected in the show. And you can see that reflected in the success of the show internationally. But I think there's a lot of conservatism and fear, and it's tricky because streamers want the young, exciting thing. They want to be bringing conversations that are exciting and characters that are new, but they also have a deep fear that if they don't present these, like exciting queer things in a straight way, then they're going to lose audiences. And I think we're definitely in that bit of the fight where it's like, how do you find that balance? And depends on the room, depends on the show.
Thank you. Bayley, so intimacy coordination is still a relatively new role in film and theatre. How do you explain its importance, or even what it is, to productions that may be unfamiliar with the practice?
The first thing I want to sort of volley back, because we get this coming through a lot, that this is a new role. And while the role is new, the function is not new. And I think it would be wrong of me not to credit the costume staff and the wardrobe team and the assistant directors and the safety crew for whom a piece of this role was always a part of what they were doing. And what's new is the idea that we understand intimacy as a sort of technical specialty in terms of choreography and in terms of on-set etiquette. So when it comes to explaining it to people, in order to make it as simple as possible, I always come in with, I'm the person with both eyes on safety and well-being. So a director can care about people's safety, of course they care, but at the end of the day, they've got to deliver the frame. Your lighting person is keeping an eye on safety in their own way, but they've got to make sure the lights are on and working and lighting what they need to light. Even your safety supervisor might have one eye on people's well-being, but at the end of the day, they've got to make sure the environment is safe, and that's their priority. And so there's actually no one on a set whose whole job is to take care of the people and to make sure that the people are, emotionally regulated where they need to be, supported where they aren't, and you're able to deliver some of the most vulnerable material that actors have to make in a safe and connected way to their craft as artists. And that's my job. So I sort of go, the priority of my role is the well-being of the team. Then you sort of have collaboration and risk analysis and all the tools and resources. And then right at the bottom of that list, you have choreography and making sure that a scene looks the way that you want it to look to tell the right story.
I see from time to time comments from, perhaps we'll say, older thespians that indicate that why do we need intimacy coordinators? Why do we need to have things like content warnings and things? What do you say to that in terms of, well, you've just
For sure. I mean, what I sort of remind them is that we said the same thing about safety supervisors when they were brought on board. We said the same thing about occupational health and safety when those laws were brought in. What do you mean we need two people to foot a ladder? Well, we decided that too many people were dying. We decided that too many people were at risk, and it was a better thing to bring in laws and protocols, and the same decision is being made here. But at the end of the day, if we can be really brutal, if the position didn't offer value for money, it wouldn't be a position in this industry. If this role was only valuable to women, there's no way it would still be running. It's clearly valuable, and this role started in the streamers. So Ida O'Brien and Alicia Rodas, who started at Netflix and HBO, respectively, there was a financial kickback to those roles working, and it was reputational, which meant that it was stakeholder based and it was audience based. It was also a huge risk mitigation strategy for if any kind of story that was coming out about the production, because we were in a position after Me Too where people were willing to talk about the experiences they were having as part of films, and those films were therefore losing their audiences. They went, this is a way. At the end of the day, the role is good to save money. I'm just gonna I'm gonna be really clear about that. And I've had these conversations. I once had an AD pull me aside on a shoot I was working on, pull me aside for a 40-minute conversation whilst we were shooting to tell me how useless my role was, which I found interesting, that you could take 40 minutes out of your shoot to come and tell me how useless my role is, while you're also calling into, anyway, due to your call. But what sort of happens there is a lot of people think that I eat up too much time or I eat up too much money, or my role doesn't. And at the end of the day, I go, well, the point of my role is to save time. Because if I'm conducting rehearsals, then we're spending less time on takes. If I've got an emotionally regulated pair or trio or 50 orgy worth group of actors, and they are well regulated and prepared to go in, and they're prepared to go in multiple times, then we're going to have less takes, which means we're going to spend less money and take less time. That is the purpose. And I think when I go into producers, I think understanding what a producer needs to hear, I kind of go in, I kind of charge in with that. And at the end of the day, I also tell producers when they hire me, I'm going to tell you no, I just need you to understand that I'm doing that to cover your ass. Because if I say no to something and you do it anyway, then literally I have it in my contract that if I've made a recommendation, you don't follow it, I'm no longer liable for the outcome. And I hope that your insurance is strong, because if someone gets injured doing an erotic scene or whatever, or gets mentally damaged, then that's on you, because I tried my best, and I'm only doing it because I actually give a shit about you, and I give a shit about your company and your project and your artists. That's why I say no.
Can I add a creative side?
Please.
Working on erotic stories for SBS, which was obviously just 8 episodes of just sex.
Shout out to Amy Cater.
Shout out to Amy Cater,
Really
incredible
just
intimacy
the best.
coordinator. But Amy also could bring to the scenes themselves a lot of insight into the specificity of queer experience. And I think it's also really important, as across in every department and role, to have diversity, because it enables your show to be authentic and bring detail that is going to read correctly to people and actually make them believe that the sex scenes that you're shooting feel genuine. And if that's the show that you're making, it has to feel real and detailed. And nobody has there is no time on set. There is no time on set for anything. And so if you can afford an intimacy coordinator, if you can afford someone whose job is to now be responsible for that thing, you're going to get a better product, you're going to get a more authentic product, you're going to get better value for money, because you're going to shoot it anyway. You should make it good. You should have people there who can enable that project to sing. And by having an intimacy coordinator come in and set up those boundaries, the actors feel more safe, because now it's not just this weird thing that they have to guess. Because again, there is no time. If you're an actor and you show up on set, you've got 20 minutes to rehearse. It's not 4 weeks in a room the way theater can be. You've got 20 minutes to figure out what you're doing, and if no one's job has been to think out the specificities of the action, if no one's job is to go, let's talk about what you're comfortable with first, so that then you can keep doing the scene, you can keep exploring and feel like everyone's agreed to what you're doing. It just allows things to happen. It actually allows for more organic material because people have discussed what the boundaries are that they feel safe with. And so I think, old heads push against it because they're like, everything should be like natural and like come from instinct. And I'm like, that is how everyone got assaulted, you fuckface. Like, that's
But it's also, when I have those conversations, well, then you should become a documentary filmmaker. Because those people aren't acting.
Yeah.
Those people are no longer acting. You have put them in a situation where they are human beings who are experiencing a situation. So I think you need to consider a genre shift. And that comes back to, thank you so much, Ian, for kind of so colourfully kind of talking about that. I really appreciate it because it's that thing that comes back to the technical specialty and what we're designed to do, which is to be really good, highly detailed storytellers and to support that. So yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Julie, over 5 decades, you've worked in many roles, from camera operator to lighting director to operations supervisor. How did you navigate these evolving responsibilities and industries, especially as technology was rapidly changing?
Actually, I found the technology the easy bit. But when I started, there's a picture up there. I've got one here. Here's one I prepared earlier. This is me working a black and white TV camera. So when I started in the industry, TV was still black and white. And it was actually very complicated to line up a camera. And as colour came along, I realised it was a bit easier to line up a colour camera. And then the next big change was digital. And again, a little prize people gave me for when I left, which is in front of an oscilloscope. I used the oscilloscope to learn how digital TV works. I just bring you some show and tell. What happened was that, but for me, the big issue was all the relationships, because because I'm from a big family, I do feel comfortable with a big crew, and so some of the biggest, with the golf, for example, in the 1970s, probably the most extreme work I did was vision mixing 42 camera golf. So that's really intense. 42 cameras coming at you for 4 days. But it was, but I felt comfortable just having. The thing is, when you've got a crew of 40 people, there's always a couple of people you get on with. There's always a couple of people who give you a hard time. But as things went on, as I got promoted, the dynamics changed in that I was now, for example, when I was with ABC Tasmania, I was in charge of 20 blokes, and they weren't all comfortable with me being female or trans, and so I basically, they really tested me in terms of my understanding of the industry. So what got me through there was the fact that I was very competent in all the technical side, which that they felt they had to appreciate, and then I had to try and put out the fights between the riggers and the camera people, for example. There was one particular day I remember, one of the cameramen was treating we only had one rigger in Tasmania, like he was his slave. And I went, no. But the way I put a stop to that was by saying, no, I'm in charge of the riggers. If you want the riggers to do something, you've got to ask me. And again, he had a real chip on his shoulder because he'd been treated really badly for years. And so when we were doing Anzac Day at the Cenotaph in Hobart, I remember saying, I took Bruce over there, because his name was Bruce. And I said, rather than say, Bruce built a scaffold, I said, no, Bruce, we need a scaffold here. It's a very small change of language, but it shows a respect for his ability to build scaffold. And then I negotiated how high it should be and where it should be, that sort of thing. So to me, that was, the main thing was listening to people and negotiating. And I think being from a big family helped with that. And the thing is, being the eldest of a big family meant that I had grown up being a leader at some level. And so I was able to translate that into the workforce. But not in my 20s. My 20s, I was really just the ghost and almost invisible. And so I then, but when you're promoted to being the boss of a crew, people notice you.
Absolutely. Back to Jean, having worked extensively in both theatre and screen, what lessons from theatre do you think filmmakers would benefit from?
Better dialogue. I think not so much film, maybe more TV. There is a real reliance on naturalism and dialogue that like feels easy and is just more in the sitcom-y casual, and I think the shows that have more heightened language I find more interesting, and like Severance, for example, is, you know, sits in a much higher heightened sort of place, and I think, yeah, that's probably, I think you're there's nothing, I mean, in the sort of language-based theatre that I usually do, it is all text, it's all what's being said, and so the dialogue has to be very efficient, but very, like, you're really pushing it. And TV, you can kind of get away with a little bit more, or screen stuff, you can get away with a bit more because it is a visual medium. You are really using that to create the story, and that is a lot of it, but I think sometimes to the detriment of the dialogue.
How do you think having second screens in homes as part of streaming has impacted the way?
Third or fourth.
Yeah,
That's
at least
real. Like the issue now is
Yeah.
it's not
at
just
least two
just
screens. Yeah, has impacted screenwriters for TV, particularly with streaming.
It's not good. I think it is quite actually a conscious thing that streamers are aware of, and actually really is impacting the way people are writing and editing, because it means everyone's going, I don't understand what's happening in this scene because I'm like walking around the house or looking at a phone, and so can you put that thing that we are seeing into the dialogue? And so you're looking at something and you're saying it and you're telling people the plot, because nobody is paying attention and we're just getting much worse TV. And
So moving away from show not tell, it's show and
show and tell, because
Show and tell.
everyone's like, shows on there, I'm on looking at my phone, they're playing Subway Surfers, but also my laptop's open because I'm checking my emails. And that is actually a lot of the expectation for some of those big budget shows, is people are going, this is too hard. If I have to look at this, if I have to just look at one screen, it's too hard for me to understand. So make this easier to understand. And I think it's a real detriment to the quality of writers and makers and creators and filmmakers who are coming out of an era of like really high quality premium TV. But that's, yeah, we're going back to junk food because everyone's very distracted all the time.
and a lot going on at once to keep
And you
the
need a lot
interest.
going on at once. You have to have it's a bit like, where's the next explosion
Yeah.
at the moment? Yeah. Do you find that in even like narrative stuff, that there is any expectation for that?
I'm not sure I should comment because I tend to fall asleep in. I think there's other people
TV.
Yeah, I don't know, for me, I've never watched a lot of screen-based stuff because I think actually now, because I've never seen myself represented. So fiction, drama, I've always leaned towards documentary because I've just never seen myself reflected in fact, watching Heartbreak High, the newer version, like I almost cried in some of the scenes because it's like, oh my God, like imagine watching this as a kid. Yeah, anyway, I've gone off on a tangent, but yeah, it's really interesting that maybe documentary watchers are different breeds. I feel like we just sit and watch ones. Like I can't even imagine checking my emails while I was watching something, but I don't watch TV much at all, really.
And maybe it's just an age thing, but I tend to only watch one screen at a time.
Yeah.
I work in both mediums a lot as well. And it's funny, I was the intimacy coordinator on Neighbours for 2 years, the return of the show. And I would often have to teach young actors about soap writing. The soap opera writing is a very particular style because it has to do that. It's so much exposition. And the lines are phrased really oddly in order to catch people who are also making dinner at 4:30 when they're making their kids' afternoon snacks. Like, it's on purpose, it's written on purpose like that. You know, they'll throw in some random word like aubergine, into something, and what? But they do it on purpose because they know that after a certain period, they'll need something to kind of snap, or they need to throw a piece of conflict in, or someone needs to scream randomly. Like, and it's just fascinating. So people who kind of come from different environments into the soap world, and we're going, how am I supposed to remember this? There's no logic in this writing. Well, yeah, that's in order to keep your audience's attention.
Maybe that's why I've never liked it, because I sit down to watch one thing and then I'm like, why does this not make sense?
Yeah. It's very rarely designed to. It's all kind of heightened to sort of so that you can kind of simmer into something else, you know.
And it is a different type of show. Like that is also a skill to kind of go, I am making this thing for a broad audience to experience in a more casual way, but that can't be the expectation for everyone.
1,000%.
Like that's really deadening to the craft of it. And,
Hugely.
but I totally respect that there are a lot of very smart people who are in that field who work in those shows, and they are very good at knowing what it is that they're trying to do.
But it's an assumption, isn't it? This is like when you talk about a show like Severance, right? Or, you know, there's any number of, you know, TV shows that have just been absolute smashes. They don't do that. But the issue is actually, I think, on top of everything else, is that so much content is being produced. Once upon a time, like, you know, a new show would come out every couple of years, maybe, like, you know, and you would kind of stick with it. And now there's so many new productions, and so they kind of have to be attention grabbing. Never mind the fact that our attention spans have been destroyed by social media. But it's also about the amount of content coming out. But when you get a show that doesn't do that, that actually does lean on its own quality, people will stop and pay attention. It's not actually that they can't or they won't at all. It's that people are trying to chuck too much content in the market, and the competition's so high that they kind of fall into this trap, I think. Whereas if, you know, we were just, you know, every network would bring out a new show every summer and add it into their rotation. That was what you got. You got 4 new shows a year, and now it's like...
So better in the 60s. Yeah.
I'm an old lady too.
Yeah, there's a
I
lot
think we only had 3 channels actually.
we have so much now, like everyone's making new shows all the time.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
there
yeah.
is just a lot of, you don't have to watch TV. You can
Yeah,
be immersed all the time, watching something new all the time, and just be watching docos, or even just one particular genre of docos.
Yeah.
I mean, people who just watch crime docos. I think their brains must be fried.
Insomnia.
I think I find just personally with a doco, particularly if it's true crime, unless I'm trying to find out what the verdict was in the case on my phone, I am glued. Otherwise, if I'm watching fiction, then I'm going, I know that actress. What was she in? IMDb. So that's where I get caught. But then I go to the theatre, and there's nothing about it that makes me want to pull my phone out. I'm completely immersed. I am in the scene with it. So the good writing, the Succession, Severance, and stuff like that really has you in the scene with them.
People can do it. People can really lock in. They can.
Yeah.
But you've got to give them something worth doing that for. That's.
Back to Mitch, your background in photography clearly influences your filmmaking style. How does your photographic eye shape the way you tell stories?
Something interesting happened because I trained as a photographer, but I never trained as a filmmaker. So I just kind of learned that through like experimenting and YouTube videos. But with a still image, you have to get lighting right. Like it has to be right. You can't fix that post-production. And so in photography, you spend a lot of time thinking about the direction of light, the quality of light, where you're going to put someone in relation to all of that. And that informs everything, really. And I noticed when I started to watch people that I knew who were making films, it was like that wasn't even a thought. Because in film, you rely on what's happening, and the dialogue and the emotion can come through in the doing, but you don't have the doing in a still image. And so emotion comes from light a lot of the time. So yeah, I think that's something that I noticed, is that I have a really strong focus still on light when I'm filmmaking. and it really bothers me when I can see filmmakers just pointing the camera and not first considering the direction and quality of light. I mean, that would happen on drama sets, but it doesn't happen
Yeah, it
generally.
feels very flat.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so, yeah, it just reminded me that when I was writing Das Kapital which is intense, boys drama in a way, or rock and roll for the ABC, I was always thinking emotion, and I was always trying to, I thought of the emotion first, and then I came up with the lighting.
Yeah, and actually what's interesting, if we think about pre-digital and now, especially with HD TVs, the first time I watched like one of the new HD TVs, Harry Potter was on, and I was horrified because I could see the lighting. Like I could see where it was so clear, like that I could actually, it took me out of the story. Like the magic of fiction was totally ruined because it was so clear and the definition was so hyper real that I was like, oh, I could actually, it's almost like they pulled away the curtains and I could see all the crew behind the scenes and I could see where they'd stuck all the lights, and I was just like, oh, like I really didn't want to watch HD TVs. I wanted to go back to my shitty box because then I could get lost in the story.
Yeah, and all I have to do is take my glasses off.
Well, it's kind of why I don't usually wear my glasses.
Bayley, we'll continue talking about your work in terms of consent-based practice. What are some common misunderstandings about consent that you encounter, and how do you address them?
I think the biggest one is that consent only happens in the bedroom. And that it only starts when sex is initiated. We learn about consent far, far earlier than that. And consent has everything to do with our bodily autonomy. It has everything to do with our sense of power. And therefore it has everything to do with our sense of personhood. And so one of my favorite things to work on, particularly if I get, working in theatre, is to do what I call consent-based dramaturgy, which is where we, get someone to make consent part of their character building. How did your character first learn about the concept of no? And is it a concept that they're familiar with? And how do they feel about the shame related to no? And how do they feel about the freedom related to yes? And give them a sense of that, because it is so core. So that's one of the biggest, I think, misconceptions about what consent is. And I think the other one is that consent is static. Consent is entirely fluid. It's entirely negotiable. It's a constant exchange. And if you treat it like a living thing, the better an experience you're going to have with each other. I get this sort of pushback a lot on things like, oh, well, now we can't hug each other anymore. And I go, okay, I need you to chill. But also, I think I can promise you that you're going to have a far more enjoyable hug with someone who wants to hug you.
Yeah.
Then that's really what it's all about.
As you say, it's static. One day you might want a hug from the same person, and then the next day you may not.
Yeah.
We might want the hug once we've all agreed that the hug is a certain location of where we're going to touch and
100%.
yeah.
But we also talk about, I think probably that leads into one of the other ones that I work on a lot, is that consent is verbal only. And so while verbal is a very clear way to communicate, not everyone has equivocal verbal communication styles, right? And so we understand that we don't always have to say the same thing over and over to get the same signal. And we learn the shorthand, we learn the body language of am I open or am I expanded or contracted? If you sort of make me a physical offer, that kind of comes from the spirit of improv and all these other performance practices. If I lean in, or if I create some space, do you match it? And therefore, how can I use that contact to tell you what I'm sort of thinking about and communicate to you in a way that's not verbal, because you don't want to go off script or whatever. So there are so many ways and means to do it. And the way that I combat that is, when I work on productions, I ask for, and what I demand, because I speak male a bit too, a chunk of time to actually run my cast and the creatives through the skills and the language tools, and go, I'm a teach an actor to fish kind of girl. And I always want actor to sort of have that skill base so that they're not dependent on me. And don't want to put them at risk where if I'm not in a room for any reason that they then feel unsafe to proceed with something. I want to give them the tools to be able to negotiate it when I am and I'm not there. So yeah.
Oh, quick question for Bayley, if you don't mind.
We're taking over.
No, it's just amazing the depth of your knowledge in this area. How did you learn this craft?
Oh gosh. Well, but I'll lean to, when I was very young and just starting out, I started out in the industry as a publicist. And I worked for an immersive theatre company. And if you're not familiar, immersive theatre is theatre that has some level of interaction with your audience, and the audience are actually part of the telling of the story, and they're part of the action. And I worked with this company, an incredible company called Built Up Theatre, who no longer exist, and they were sort of the darlings of Edinburgh, the Amanda Palmers and the fancy schmancy people, the glitterati of Edinburgh Fringe Festival used to go and see this company, and they were rehearsing and they started to do all this consent work. How do we know who wants to get up with us? How do we know when they're in and when they're out? How do we make sure we let them know what is being asked of them in various moments and who's going to take care of this, and what are we looking for when they come in? Because what fascinated me was, they obviously pull people at different times to different things, but they knew everyone within the first 2 minutes of the audience walking in. They had already cast the whole thing. And I found that really interesting. I was like, well, how do you do it? And they kind of had this, and they learned it because they'd hurt someone really badly in a production. They had caused someone to have an actual psychotic breakdown in the middle of a show. And they kind of went away and went, that cannot ever happen again. And so they kind of made the practice up. And I was really lucky to sort of watch them. And that kind of stayed with me. It stayed with me when I was in the industry. It stayed with me when I was slut-shamed out of the industry, which is a story that I sometimes tell. But I kind of had to leave the industry, and it stayed with me when I went back and did my master's on cultural and creative industries, and I wanted to do this master's. I was told the university wouldn't allow it because there wouldn't be enough data, and then Me Too happened, and they asked me if I still wanted to do it after all. I interviewed 30 or so creatives from top tier academics to indie to radio to any number of performers, and asked them about it and sort of took that lived experience. And yeah, that was kind of, and then I had my first ever pilot of a program on it was an immersive theatrical adaptation of The Wolf of Wall Street, which is exactly as hellish as it's because we obviously had 16 incredible actors who were simulating being coked up, sex-crazed stockbrokers with a 300-strong audience of actual coked up, sex-crazed stockbrokers. It was an absolute nightmare on wheels, but I learned a lot through the experience of of being part of that team and working in those environments. And yeah, and I've been very blessed that over the last 7 years, I've just been the girl that gets called to that's my thing. I never really actually intended to be an intimacy coordinator because I didn't see intimacy coordinators being the issue, but being the solution to Me Too. Because an intimacy coordinator wouldn't have been in that room with Harvey and any of those actors. It was a cultural issue, and I wanted to combat the culture, and so consent-based practice was sort of where I started out.
Question.
Thanks for that. Jean, intersectionality is a strong through line in your work, highlighting how race, queerness, diaspora and identity intersect in complex ways. Why do you think it's vital to tell stories that reflect these experiences?
I mean, I think all the stories are vital. For me, it's just not something that I can not do. Like, it's kind of all that I have. So the things that I work on inevitably are that. I think it's, as you were kind of saying, like, it's very hard to find ourselves on screen, on stage, in stories. We are mimetic creatures. We learn about who we are by seeing it in others, and it's very hard to understand who you are if you can't see that in front of you, if you can't compare and contrast. And so if we're just surrounded by like straight cis stories, then all we're feeling is we're not that, but I don't know what I am. And so I think, yeah, being able to create one aspect of that story is very important. I think I grew up not, seeing anybody who looks like me on screen, and I think I still don't really. There's a lot of queer characters, but not a lot of queer and Asian, or the intersection of all of those things is still very rare. And even though I work in so much queer media, I often still feel a bit like I'm not there a lot of the time, which is an odd feeling to have. So yeah, just trying to, I think a lot of the time I'm just on the work wheel and just doing it, but I think when I stop to think about it, it's kind of still something that is the underlying driver of just, I think, media and stories are the way we understand the world and ourselves. So to be able to reflect that and try and create that narrative is a big privilege.
I want to ask this of all the panel. Do you think that we're seeing an improvement in seeing queer characters and trans characters not just be the villain or the person that dies in the middle of the story or whatever? Do you think we're moving enough away from those stereotypes or tropes? And what could we be doing better?
I might just quickly start. For the first, I'd say, close to 40 years of my life, any trans character I saw on screen was either a murderer, sexual predator, was murdered, or suicided. And that didn't give me, didn't make me feel great about, my future. I knew I had to try and find a way through this, which I sort of feel I have. So I got to my 70s already. And there have been a few, we tried to step outside that. Like, probably the first movie I remember seeing where the character wasn't, murdered, sexual predator, a murderer, or suicide, was The Crying Game. But even in The Crying Game, the male love, the potential male love interest does vomit at seeing our trans character naked, but to me that still felt like progress in 1992 when that film came out. And yeah,
Spoilers, by the way. If you haven't seen it since 1992, I think you say.
And so, oh no, okay. But that was only a minor subplot. But there's not enough. And there's so many films with the work where trans characters, but they're still the main tropes, and they're the ones I've seen. And I would love to see that change, and that's why I'm very willing to, I do my little show where I try to break that down, and I've also been on Compass a couple of times in Queer Australia, and for me that's just about trying to break down those stereotypes. And the way I see it is and doing a thing like this for WIFT is really valuable, because it's basically saying we're not like that.
I think there's a process for change, particularly when we're asking people's brains to change. So people like what they know. And so for all of our history, we haven't shown trans stories, we haven't shown gender diverse stories, we've barely shown women's stories, we've barely shown people of colour stories, people with disability. All those stories of otherness haven't been shown. And so for a large majority of people, their brains are wired to only see things that they're familiar with. And so if we immediately put in all these stories en masse, it would break people's brains. Like, not because they are bad people, but because they have wired their brains to only be seeing certain things. And so there's this really slow process of change. And the more people see things, there's a concept called the mere exposure effect, which was a scientific sort of proven thing in the 60s, where the more someone sees something and no adverse effect happens, the more they like it. And so that's the importance of putting these stories gradually within mainstream, because the more, it's almost like a covert operation.
Trojan horse.
Yeah, if we gradually put these stories in, not as mainstream characters, but just they're there.
Yeah.
And they're just floating around and nothing bad is happening to them, and they're not doing anything bad to other people, then there's this little shift that happens in a brain. And so then the next time there's a character, now they've got a speaking line and they're interacting. And then suddenly, oh, it's okay for trans people to speak,
Yeah.
you know, and oh, they're not saying anything bad. And so now I'm more comfortable. And so if we think about even all of the ways that we're creating what we do and understanding, like you could have this dream of, I want to have, you know, 10% main characters are trans characters in, you know, 2030 or whatever. We can't get to that immediately because it will create revolt, because people will be like, I'm terrified. And our, you know, prehistoric brain jumps in and goes, I don't know this, I'm too scared, I don't want anything to do with this. And so if we think about our roles wherever we are in history, as I'm playing this small piece in time to shift brains to this next space, and that's okay. I'm doing my bit, so then the next people can come along in 5 years' time and create the next change.
Yeah, but we're doing that with our colleagues and our families.
Exactly.
You know, so, you know, at the ABC, I came out to 700 people. And then with the Gay and Lesbian Press, I came out to 20,000. Then when I ran for Parliament, I came out to 3 million. So we're all doing that with our friends and colleagues.
Yeah, and you can't underestimate that, the way that builds in people. Like someone might have seen you on TV and that was the first thing, and that's not scary because that's on TV.
Yeah.
And then they meet someone in their workplace and they're like, oh, you know, they don't do it consciously, but they're like, oh, that's something that was familiar, and that's okay. And so all of our roles are just to create slowly more and more characters that do more and more things, that take up more and more space in our society, and then people can watch them without freaking out. Yeah.
I'll do script consulting time to time on trans character, and if anyone's seen the movie Mona Lisa Smile, I sort of take inspiration from this particular quote that I won't go into that part of the story, but I always will send my feedback against 3 kind of markers, which is show me depth, intellect, and interests. And those are the 3 things I look out for. And if you give me a character who has no depth, no intellect, and no interests, then this isn't a character that kind of you've got that. Well, I suppose it's not even that you shouldn't do it, it's that you've got to acknowledge the choice you're making by making that character a facsimile of something else, and exploiting their transness for the scandal it can provide the rest of the story. And I suppose that's sort of where I hope we start to make the sort of next changes forward, is that, you know, it's intersectionality, it's integration, where, you know, a trans person's life and identity and experiences aren't scandalous to the main plot or any of the other characters. As people are integrated into the social life of everyone, and as we are in the world, it's sort of like, you know, where are we integrated and where do we have more to offer than our gender identity? Where do we have sort of our own things going on that are part of our character development? I think we can often it can be very reductive to kind of go, well, you know, we're going to reduce you to this one component of your identity, and I'm excited for us to kind of be a bit more expansive in that, I think, is what I'm sort of looking for.
Yeah, stereotypes are just bad writing, firstly. Like, I mean,
Lazy.
It's lazy, it's bad writing. It's I think representation is something that is happening at a lot of levels all the time, and there's side characters and then there's main characters, and I think again this is a push, like, this is not a new thing, and everyone is kind of carrying all of that all the time, and media is sort of, it's one aspect of it. I think there's always pushback, obviously, and I think we're in the big part of the cycle where the pushback is very heavy because it feels like overrepresentation, because there has been so little, and now trans people are very visible, and that visibility is becoming dangerous because people are pushing back in very violent ways, and that's very upsetting. I think it's something that is people aren't going to stop. I think it's important to just keep pushing through that and remain visible where we can, and keep creating content and keep insisting and reminding people that these stories are first and foremost good stories that are interesting, and we're not I think when people talk about representation in a kind of isolated, like, this is a trans character, this is an Asian character, this is a queer character, like that limits what that person and that character or that story is, and it makes people start to box that in rather than going, this is a story about a person who's trying to find love or a job or, you know, now live in the world. And I think there was definitely a period where representation politics was very much the language, and I think the more we can move away from that and expand what that means, the better we're all going to be for it in the long run.
Right.
It also underestimates what people can learn from each other
Yeah.
and actually how similar our experiences are. Like, I really first realized that when I was quite early in Making Equal the contest, and I went to a friend's birthday, and one of my friend's boyfriends was just like, oh, I heard you make a film, what's it about? And I said, it's about footy. And he was just like, oh, right, like, what kind of thing? And I started to talk to him about, you know, how I felt in sport and being excluded and what it feels like to be in this environment where it has been literally built for us to feel like we belong. And I looked at him, and he's this big, burly guy. And I looked at him, and he had tears in his eyes, and I was like, are you all right? And he was like, oh, I played footy as a kid. And I was like, okay. And he said, I never felt comfortable in that environment. I always felt like I didn't want to be around that masculinity and the discomfort of feeling like things were happening that he didn't think was okay, but he didn't feel like he could stand up for it. And I was just like, oh, like, men are not comfortable in these spaces either.
Yeah.
So, like, yeah, I would never have thought that my situation could resonate with a very masculine looking man. But it did. And so, like, if we don't have all these diversity of stories, we can't possibly create spaces where people can kind of go, oh, I see myself in this, even though I don't look like you. Yeah.
We're just going to ask one more question and then move through to Q&A for the audience. So I want to ask everybody about any upcoming projects or current projects and you would like to briefly talk about. I'm sure you'll have more opportunity in the tables and also separately to do so. But if, we'll start with Julie, who's come with props. If you could just tell us about a current project and what you're working on and what you...
Yeah, I think people have seen an earlier version of this show. I'm now calling it Ident. So it's basically my story with the idea of just trying to get people to understand at an emotional and empathetic level what trans is about. It's called Identity Quest, a trans and gender demythology, because I think there's too much crap out there about transness. So this version is at as part of Midsummer. It's at Gasworks, 20th to 24th of January next year. It's that's my next big project. And you know, I did it a week ago at Melt, which didn't have big audiences. So people seem to appreciate it. And and I do talk about football.
Mitch, sorry, Mitch.
Yes, I've just started a second feature documentary called The Gender Game, and it delves more deeply into trans and gender diverse inclusion in sport more broadly, so not football based, but just sport in general. And there is a scientific research study happening in Melbourne at the moment, tracking skeletal muscle changes in bodies of cis people and trans people and non-binary people to see, well, basically to debunk myths around competitive advantage in sport. And so there is a general knowledge that advantage doesn't exist in the way that people believe it does, but there's never been an experiment done over the size and the length that this one is being done to. So yeah, the film will track my own body within that study, and then also start to delve out more broadly into sport and what it can look like if we reimagine sport as a place for true belonging and inclusion.
Do you have a date that you hope that it comes out, or it's still too much in process?
Too much of process.
Okay. So keep an eye out for it. So when's it on? Sorry, what's its name?
The Gender Game.
The Gender Game.
Yeah.
Right, great.
Yeah.
Jen?
I'm currently redrafting my play, which is going to be on an MTC Film Company early next year. I think we opened somewhere around the 20th of February. It's called Do Not Pass Go. It's a two-hander about work, and one of the characters is transcoded and is saving up for gender affirmation surgery. And it's one of the storylines in the show, but really it's about living under capitalism and just having to go to work every day when everything is falling apart.
And currently you've directed a play that's on at the Arts Centre.
Yes, I've directed Dying a Memoir, which is an adaptation of a book by Corey Taylor. Benjamin Lord's the adaptation, and it's this beautiful story of this woman who Corey Taylor was writing in the last kind of bit of her life, and the focus of the adaptation was really sort of how she's navigating the culture around dying and the lack of language that we have around it. We touch on voluntary assisted dying, which she didn't have access to in the time that she was going through her diagnosis and died. And yeah, that's been really great. Like, it's just about trying to open up the space for those kinds of hard conversations that everyone's going through. And also, while I'm spruiking, I'm very excited also to be directing Cassie Hamilton's A Transgender Woman on the Internet Crying, which is a hilarious, incredible hyperpop comedy musical. I can't say where yet, but it is actually not in Melbourne, but that's the kind of things kind of keeping me afloat and very excited for.
Gosh. I'm about to. I actually got my first feature that I'll be working on. After doing a bit of TV stuff and sort of web series stuff that's really exciting me on a feature by Glass Bricks called Murder Prank on My Girlfriend Gone Wrong. Sam Cusson is the producer, who is a very dear friend and another trans creative. I'm really excited to work with this team on this movie that's really wild and kind of thriller. And so I leap into that kind of shortly. You're looking into next year. The Trans Theatre Festival, the inaugural Trans Theatre Festival, is happening at Malthouse Theatre. There's going to be some incredible productions on there and some incredible sort of development support events as well. So I strongly urge you to have a look at what's going on there. During Midsummer, I'm very thrilled that I'm part of the Telling It with Pride Speakers program at Vic Pride Centre, along with someone who's in the back there, who's also with me. So on the 20th of January, we have our sort of big presentation, this big showcase of all this graduating speakers from that program, which I'm really excited for. And then I think I roll straight from there into working on a Griffin Theatre production in Sydney of The Elocution of Benjamin Franklin, which is a sort of museum piece, 50 years, very controversial, interesting piece of stagecraft. And then I go into doing my show. I wrote a show with Jo Clifford, a trans writer in the UK, who wrote a show called 36, which is about transness as a metaphor for dying and evolution. And so it's about facing death and there's sort of that myth that trans people have a life expectancy of 35 years old, and so what happens when you turn 36? And so it's kind of all based on that. So that's going to be coming back in Sydney, and I'm writing the follow-up to that. So yeah, busy girl.
Yeah. Apart from I have a play that's coming up, and I'm just confirmed.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Just confirmed that.
Still working on the placeholder.
Yes, from the 27th of January to the 8th of February. It's part of Midsummer at 45 Downstairs. My first ever production on the main stage, the placeholder. So I'm very excited, and I hope lots of people will come. I won't talk too much about that. People can ask me if you like, but we want to do some questions from the audience. But unfortunately, I'm getting the feedback from our conversation when I try to look at it. So I don't know what the fix is with that. What do we think?
We can relay it.
Awesome.
Yeah. There's none at the moment, but we'll go to
Okay.
our light words first.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, like
Does anybody have a question for anybody? Alex in the front. That-
I was interested with intimacy coordination. Is it mostly between like on-scene like lovers, or do you do like coordination for like other kind of relationships? And how does that kind of play out?
Yeah, absolutely. So my mentor, Cecily Smith-Stovall, who, if you've ever had the chance to work with Cecily, is an incredible intimacy coordinator, incredible cultural safety educator. Uses this sort of idea that an intimacy coordinator is useful for any kind of interaction between people that you would find alarming to see at a grocery store.
Okay.
So, if you saw people kind of, holding hands at a supermarket, you probably wouldn't be too stressed. But if you saw people making love at a supermarket, you might have cause for alarm. If you saw, CPR or someone you're trying to be revived from unconsciousness, if you saw, if you saw a carer kind of, facilitate, kind of moving someone in or out of a chair, these kinds of things would kind of draw your attention. And so I often kind of, when I do analyses of scripts, I'll look at 4 main categories. So the first category is anything romantic or pseudo-sexual, and that includes nudity. So that's anything beyond a peck on the cheek and a sort of casual holding of hands will kind of get flagged. I also have anything that is violent. So anything that kind of involves any kind of violence gets flagged for intimacy, and that sort of then comes between whether you use an intimacy coordinator or a stunt coordinator, or ideally both. Anything familial. So if you are, a nursing parent, or any kind of, if there's a smacking of a minor, or a minor walks into the room when their parents are doing something, like it was sort of any of that sort of familial or carer-based intimacy. Amy worked on an incredible show called Cost of Living. I don't know if anyone saw it last year. It's an incredibly beautiful scene where a carer sort of moves someone out of it, moves another character out of a chair, and they get sort of showered on stage, and derobed and showered on stage. Incredibly. It has nothing to do with sex at all, but it's incredibly intimate. So there's that, and then anything with death and unconsciousness. I once had a producer on a show and sort of go, well, why do you need to come in for that? So, okay, I'll tell you. How about you close your eyes and you stay perfectly still, and at some point I'm going to touch you.
Yeah.
And then at point proven, I don't know. So yeah, it could be anything. I love doing relationship-based dramaturgy. I love when I get to actually work on a relationship and kind of help people build the physical language that happens. That's always really joyful. I got to work on a relationship between 2 characters on Neighbours, and I got to be with them every scene from their first scene together. And and we were doing when does the hair flick, and where's the sort of casual touch, and where's the sort of look, and when's the turn, and how do we kind of build, and got to kind of follow that right through to its romantic climax, and had a ball. So yeah.
Can I ask a question, continuing on from that? In terms of, we've talked a lot about on-screen intimacy or on-screen, consent. Are there any practices in place for crew that are possibly watching violent scenes or intimate scenes that might be affected by what they're filming?
Yeah, it's really important that we're communicating to crew, and that crew are part of the story. You're absolutely right. Thank you for sort of raising that, Lauren. I think it kind of comes back to, you made a reference earlier about content warnings. I'm sure he'll forgive me if I bring up an anecdote about him, but if anyone knows Ian, who played Harold on Neighbours for many, many years, I had the great joy of meeting him during his last stint on Neighbours. And we got to interact very briefly, and he kind of took me to task and went, I came in before, this all came in, and he was being totally polite and just, but kind of went, well, I take a bit of issue with this stuff. I think this is all a bit intense, and all a bit much, and overstated and over needed, And years ago I was working on a scene with Georgie Stone, and I found it really affected me because of, I had lost my wife, and this is about losing someone, and I found that really, really painful and difficult to do. I went, okay, Ian, you've just given me the proof as to why we do it. That's literally why we do it. And he went, oh, okay. And I had this happen so often, and it's kind of the point about, I think a lot of sort of older, white and white adjacent, sort of male and mask adjacent, sort of push against things because they're expected to, and because they're told that that's what they're supposed to do. And I get so often this sort of like pushback, and all I do is go, well, here's what it's about, and you're probably already doing it, and they are, and it's always so kind of stunning to me. But yeah, we use content warnings to notify crew. We give as much advance warning about any kind of intimacy as possible. We also talk to production about, you know, the cultural diversity of the crew, because that's going to make a big impact. You know, there are certain scenes that crew of certain cultural backgrounds can't be present for, particularly if you're getting into sexual stuff, so you have to kind of ask those questions. So yeah, the crew are a really critical piece of the pie, and they need to be notified, and their well-being matters just as much as the cast. And that's what I mean when I say I'm the person with both eyes on people's well-being. It's not just the people on the camera, but it's the people who are behind them who have to kind of, you know, get up like this, you know, to some of those things.
I want to ask Mitch about making your second feature. How do you go about that from a production point of view, from a financial point of view? Yeah, is it something you're developing alongside?
Yeah, I don't do anything that I did the first time.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. This time I've had some parameters in place, and one of the first ones was that I wasn't even going to start if I didn't feel like I could have support, because the first time I did it with largely no support, and it pretty much broke me.
Yeah.
And same with financial backing. The first time I did it with pretty much no funding, and that financially broke me. So yeah, this time I've been much more conscious of collecting a group of people around me that I can trust, and that's still a work in progress. And then also so it started because I did apply for a big screen grant and got that, and so it's like, okay, well, I will start. And I've still been very much like almost 1 foot in, going, if I can't continue to get funding, I don't know that I want to do it. Like I think the first time I just went in I wasn't thinking about making a film, so I had a story and believed it was really important in my bones, and then I almost like grabbed onto it and it like took off, and I just was holding on for dear life. And this time I think I know a lot more about what to expect, and so there's things that I'm trying to put in place. Whether or not I can do that to the point that everything is covered, I'm not sure yet, but definitely I'm much more conscious of what I will and won't tolerate in the filmmaking process.
Yeah, I was going to ask a question further to that about funding. So how do you go with funding? Any advice on funding?
Well, I've just recruited my partner Holly, who's quite good at that as a role. But I think the first time I knew I had a story, and I knew I had a story that would resonate, particularly to grassroots, which is where cultural change can happen really strongly. I wasn't, rightly or wrongly, I wasn't that fussed about whether or not it would end up on SBS, and it has. But that's almost like, I almost reverse engineered the whole process.
Right.
Like normally, in order to get funding, you have to have a commission. And in order to have a commission, you have to have made something else before. And it's like this catch-22. And so I was sitting in this place where I was like, but what if you've just got a story that you know is good? And of course, I made all the phone calls and wrote all the emails, and no one would respond. And so I made it anyway. And then the interesting thing is now, when I am reaching out to people, everyone knows who I am. And so now I am able to have conversations, and whether or not that equates to the money that I need is yet to be decided. But definitely there's something about just, unfortunately, getting things under your belt in order to then be taken seriously. But it's that really difficult thing, I think, in Australia in particular, that we don't value creatives, and we don't create an infrastructure to allow people to gain experience. And we don't like when people don't fit in neat boxes. Like, I have had the most convoluted journey, you know, and I still I don't call myself a filmmaker, because that's not how I see myself. You know, I just really love human stories. And so sometimes I like to tell them through photography, and sometimes I like to just sit with them and be in them, and sometimes they feel like they'll make a good film. But when you go to apply for a particularly narrow stream of funding, if they haven't seen you in that stream before, then they're like, who the hell are you? And things like, you know, a lot of the creative grants in Australia, you don't qualify if you're making a screen project because there's screen funding. But if, like, I'm quite well known in Victoria at least, and a little bit in Australia as a creative, but no one knows me in the screen industry prior to the Equal Contest. So it's like, if I applied for creative funding, I would probably have a good chance of getting it because I've had a lot of those grants, but I don't qualify now because now I'm using my creativity to make a film. So now I have to go to the film grants, and now I don't qualify because I'm not experienced. Even though, like, I'd run a production company. When I started Equal the Contest, I'd been running my production company for 18 years. And I'd made a whole lot, like I've made hundreds of short films, but I'd never made a feature film. And even though to me that felt like the most natural progression to have spent 18 years making hundreds of short films, one of them a 40-minute film, that still held no sway. So it's like we've got such specific ideas of who a filmmaker is. And what I bring to film is, I think, quite interesting because I've not been funneled through a system that's going to tell me how to do things. So I do things really oddly because I've had no rules attached to me. So it's like we don't value what could be really valuable in all of our industries when we get to shift and swap and change. Yeah. Anyway, that's the whole thing about the creative system in Australia. Yeah. It's really hard. Yeah.
So screen and media industry is very risk adverse, despite being made up of creatives that are always trying to take risks, and they can be very contradictory with, we want to invest in these types of stories, and then they don't give them the funding to do those stories, which can be, it feels like there's a lot of gaslighting that fuels the industry. So I was just wondering how you take care of yourselves to maintain energy to keep going and doing these things when there's so many roadblocks in the way. Because I think that can derail a lot of people, and strategies for like care and keeping the course is quite hard to come by and sometimes found too late. So I don't know if you can speak on that.
I'll certainly say something to that, and that is having a mentor has been hugely impactful for me in my creativity, and finding someone. For me, it's Kate Mulvaney, and as somebody that grew up in country Western Australia, okay, it's not quite the same as country Victoria, but regional area. She's informed by her disability as well as her love of storytelling. So for me, finding somebody as generous as Kate is, who meets me on my level, has been great for my mental health, given that, creative work is often so isolating until you're in the middle of a production or something like that. So being able to find a mentor if you can, and that could be just, somebody who's done it before you. So yeah.
For me, it's about peer support. I've got 3 or 4 people I can bounce off. And I have been, not so much about being in, for me, the ABC was mostly a job, and I felt that was, I could deal with that mostly, but where I found it difficult is where I've burnt out quite a few times is in trans activism, which I just feel at the moment there's an infinite amount needed. So it's for me pulling back and pacing myself, trying to be physically fit, and encouraging everybody to be an ally. And the way I see it is the people with the most privilege have the most, with the most agency have the most privilege. And people who are feeling really on the back foot. I have very little irresponsibility for changing the world. But if we can all put a little bit into making the world a better place, I think that's what I try to encourage. Yeah.
I think it's having a sense of yourself outside of the creative work that you do.
Usually.
I love to do sport. I am trying really hard to not make any content about that in any way, because you just have to go like do things that give you perspective. Like, this is our job, and it's a job that we love because we have a lot of heart for it. Like, the stories are very personal, the endeavor is very personal, but it can really like eat you alive. And I think the last couple of years for me has been a lot of the ways that I feel better about my life is going, that's like the thing that I do, and what is the thing that I am, and what are the things I enjoy that are not about my work and my writing or whatever. Like, it's me going and like being really shit at amateur basketball. Like, it's having a life in a sense of your ego, in the sense of your self-worth outside of the quality of the craft or whatever that is. Like, that just has to be like, who am I as a person? What am I contributing to in my friendships, in my family, in my communities? What am I as a person, like outside of the work itself? Because the structure of it is so big, and sometimes if you let that become your whole world, you're just gonna bash your head against the wall and then become understandably bitter. But I don't really want to live like that, and I don't want that to be the person that I become, where I'm just thinking about work and angry about work all the time.
When I train team members and cast members and creatives on well-being strategy, one of the things I say is, if you were to trade the word creativity or the word art or theatre or whatever it is for the word religion, you would realize that we're all a cult. Or if you traded art or filmmaking or theatre for a word like gambling, you realize we're all addicts. Like, so that's it. And these are harmful things, but they're the truth. We surround ourselves only with each other. We don't do we get really deep in, we invest everything, we invest our life force and our entire, financial.
Stop.
So I absolutely am so in agreement with what you've said, Jean. But one of the tools that I sort of give people is that put up a big piece of paper or whatever it is that works, and you've got 20. You do like 3 lists of 20. The first one is when you have very little energy, time, or money. When you have a some amount of time, energy, and money. When you have a large amount of time, energy, and money, and you fill it 20 things that you can do that improve your mood at any rate at all. So a lot of us think that self-care or well-being is, I took a spa day. I'm in the arts. I can't afford no spa day. That's not going to happen. When I'm having a well-being issue, it's when I'm getting my ear chewed off by an AD who thinks my job's bullshit. I can't go for a shower right there, and I can't go have a massage there, and I have to work. So it's about kind of going, what can I do? And I have this list that I refer back to, and like on the sort of lower end, I've got like, eat a carrot, call a boyfriend, like do any number of things that don't require a lot from me, but just kind put a pair of heels on or touch up my hair. Like, all those things can just sort of help get me moving in the right direction. And I might need to do a few from each list, but at least then I don't have to spend the extra energy to think of what I can do. Thanks, past Bayley. Here's 60 things. And somewhere in there, I'm going to find something that just gets me moving in some kind of right direction. And it feels nice to know that I looked after myself, however long ago I wrote it, and I keep it topped up. And that's a tool that I always share. I think it's important.
Sustainability is not just how do you sustain yourself financially project to project. It's how do you sustain yourself as a person. And I think, you can really lose it if you're just thinking about the work of it.
I think it's important as well to decide what is important and what success looks like to you, because so very early on in making Equal the Contest, I thought what is important to me is if I screen this film to my teammates and they can see themselves reflected in what I've made, and that they feel valid and that their experience feels seen And so the whole time I spent making the film, I wasn't thinking about how am I going to get this on SBS? How am I going to get this into cinemas? I was thinking, how am I going to make sure every decision I'm making is appreciated by my teammates? And so that is a bar that feels extremely achievable as a creative, like, because it's all based on my own decisions, and it holds me to account. If I can keep making sure I've got everyone in this as my highest priority, then this is going to be great. And that's success to me. And then it was a byproduct that then also, and if it resonates with the core people you're working with, it's probably going to resonate with a larger audience, which it then did. And then once that happens, then the screen industry is kind of like, oh, well, why didn't no one fund this thing? Let's put it on a broader platform. And so then it kind of became this thing that just happened. But that was never my priority, and that wasn't my measure of success. Like if all I did was screen to my teammates in the footy change rooms on a white sheet, and they cried at the end or they hugged me at the end, that would have been complete accomplishment.
Well, that's going to conclude this formal part of our panel. I'd love to thank all of you for listening so intently and asking some great questions. And I'd like you at the end of this to put your hands together for Julie, Mitch, Jean, and Bayley, please.
Okay.